Money stress seeps into all areas of our life. So it's going to affect your relationships. It's going to affect your job. It's going to affect all of these things. So when we can, I'm not saying that relieving your money stress is the magic pill, right? But relieving your money stress and having control over your money can positively impact other areas of your life as well.
Welcome back to another episode of the Young Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Lang, and today's guest is a mover and shaker in the personal finance community. She is exceptional at teaching people how to pay off debt and budget. Please help me in welcoming Allison Baggerly.
Oh, thank you so much, Ethan. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm really excited to talk because a lot of my previous guests have been talking about investing and that side, and I think that we really miss the point sometimes when we forget to start with the budgeting to be able to have that money to invest. But a lot of people, when they hear the word budgeting, and even me sometimes, it's kind of like a cringy subject, don't like to hear it necessarily. But you think about a budget in a different way than most people do. Could you explain that to our listeners?
Absolutely. So I think of the budget as the foundation to be able to do all the other things like investing, like saving money, like being able to spend money on what you want. So to me, the foundation or the budget is the foundation. And in the past, I used to see it as this thing that controlled me, that told me what to do. But I had to change the way I looked at a budget and realize that, hey, I'm the one in control. No matter what my budget looks like, I'm the one that gets to choose where the money goes and what happens with it. And so it's essentially a spending plan, right? Where do you want to spend your money? What's important to you? So that way you can focus on spending money there, cutting back on the rest so that you can meet your money goals. Whether your money goals are to save for a wonderful vacation, save for a down payment for a home, pay off debt, invest and retire early, all of it starts with your spending plan or your budget.
Yeah, because it's really about what are the things that you value. And that's what I really liked when I was kind of looking at your page and doing some of the prep for this episode was you talked a lot just about, what are the things that you value, and that's what you should be focusing on. Normally, when people hear a budget, they think like I'm depriving myself. I have to spend less money on all these areas. But then there's also people on the other side of the coin. When I started, I was super frugal to the point like where it was almost detrimental. And I think one of the benefits for me by having a budget is I pick the areas I want to spend more in as well and almost force myself a little bit to spend in those areas because I know those are the areas that I derive a lot of value from. So yeah, you're 100% right. It's really just finding about, the places where you value money and spending on those areas. How do people kind of find those areas?
I think, right now in a world, whenever you haven't been managing your money, it's hard to pinpoint them down. It's hard to say because really society is telling us that everything is equally important when it comes to spending money or that certain things are important, but we might be just spending money, not really aware of what's important to us. And that's where I found myself. I thought I knew what I wanted to spend money on 10 years ago, and it was almost everything. And then finally I was like, wait a minute, I had to step back and say, is this really where I find value? So it takes a lot of almost like trial and error, right? Spending money on things and saying like, was that really worth it? Is that really what I want in my life? And then also a lot of reflecting. For me, I think that, I've been doing this for a while now, it's also okay for those areas to change. So years ago, I had young kids and travel wasn't a value to me. I didn't want to travel a lot. It gave me a lot of stress and anxiety with little kids. And so for me, I valued spending money on things inside my home. And now that my kids are older, I value spending money on travel. And so I've given myself permission to let those values change. But it really looks at it comes down to taking time to really think about what brings you joy, not what is the world tells me should bring me joy, and not thinking about what other people are saying should bring you joy, and instead being able to say for yourself what brings you joy. And that takes practice and patience and getting it wrong until you get it right.
Yeah, because it's so easy to go about thinking about the American dream. You want the bigger house and the nicer car and the newer car. And it's so easy to fall into that. And for some people, a new car doesn't bring them any value, but they think it's going to because that's what the American dream is and what everyone thinks they need. But in reality, it could be, just eating out a few more times a month could be important for someone, or like you said, vacationing, and that does change. And if you notice that it's changed, you've been able to realize those changes from budgeting?
Yes, I think that, budgeting is the foundation, and it's basically you being in control of your money. You knowing, you facing your money truth, owning your truth, and deciding what next steps you're going to take. And whenever you know your money truth, what comes from that is clarity in what you want to spend your money on, and understanding the emotions that come whenever you do feel strapped for money, or you are able to save, and what that brings to you, the emotions that it brings to you. And so I think that a budget allows you, it's almost like the first step in allowing you to have clarity when it comes to your money goals, what you want to spend money on, and what you're willing to sacrifice. Because I don't spend money on everything, right? Like,
Yep.
there's no way. I don't. There are areas in our life where we don't spend money, but we choose to do that because ultimately it's not as important as spending money in other areas. So in a world that tells us that everything is equally important, we have to say, no, what is it that's most important to me and my family? And it's okay if that looks different from someone else.
For sure. And one of the things I want to go back to that you said knowing your truth and owning your truth. And I know for a lot of people, when they first think about, starting a budget, one of the things that scares them is that they're going to look at their financial picture and be like, oh, it's a lot worse than I thought it was. What would you say to someone that's kind of in that situation?
I think that it's honestly totally normal to have that fear. And really, where does the fear stem from? The fear stems from the unknown. We don't talk about money. Money was so taboo for many of us. I know that the generation I grew up in, you didn't talk about money. Your parents didn't know what was going on with money. They were trying to learn about it themselves. So how can they teach us? So really, the fear is of the unknown because we don't feel equipped with enough knowledge for what to do if it is the worst that we've ever seen, right? So I will never forget sitting down and totaling up our debt and looking at it and feeling that feeling of, oh my gosh, number one, is this bad? Is this normal? And then number two, when I realized it is, and it was bad and it wasn't necessarily normal, realizing, how did I get here? And it's easy in those moments when you're sitting there looking at your money truth and you're wondering how I got here, how did I get here? It's easy to fall into guilt and shame and to say, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so dumb. I'm done with money. But instead, in those moments when I did want to fall into guilt and shame, what I say instead is, no, we can't lead with shame and guilt. Instead, we have to say, you know what? I didn't know what I didn't know. And I can't get onto myself when I didn't have the knowledge and I wasn't equipped to make those decisions. So now I am. So now what can I do to equip myself with the knowledge to move forward and make changes in my life? And that looks like figuring out what your budget is, figuring out how much debt you want to pay off, finding a system that works for you, learning about investing. So it just starts there. And I would say that it's okay to feel that way, but don't sit in those feelings. Feel them for a moment and then say, okay, this is no longer going to help me move forward. So set them aside and say, what's the next thing I can do to move forward in my money?
Exactly, because those feelings are there partially
Yes.
for a reason. You should have those feelings when you have a lot of debt. That should scare you a little bit.
Right.
Enough to motivate you to begin starting that budget and paying it off, but not too much to where it paralyzes you.
Exactly.
One of the things I wanted to talk about before we get into like the budgeting process is we've talked about, people being scared to start the budget, but what has the experience been like for you now that you've been budgeting for 10 years? Can you explain that to people and show them like how your life has been bettered because of it?
Of course. I mean, and I work with a lot of women who feel very lost and confused with their money, and they're always scared to get started with budgeting. And the truth is, it's not as hard as the world makes it seem. It's not as hard as you're making it seem because it's just new and it's just different. And that's okay. New and different can be scary, but the benefits of budgeting, for me personally, have given me a lot of peace and control over my money. As someone who struggles with anxiety, I had had a lot of money anxiety, but I didn't want to deal with it because I had anxiety about what happens if I deal with it and I don't know what I'm doing. So it was ridiculous. But once I actually sat down and worked on my budget and, didn't give up along the way, because there's going to be months when it's just a total mess and a wreck. And there's going to be months where you feel like you're doing well. The more I budgeted, the more comfort, the more security, the more peace of mind I had over my money. And the more I saw that, oh my gosh, I can do amazing things with my money. Even though I don't make a ton of money, my husband and I were two teachers, even though we didn't make a lot of money and we had kids in daycare, we still had the ability to make changes in our life with our extra money. And we were only able to do that because we sat down to budget.
And I think in the beginning, like you said, you guys both had low incomes at the time, and you were still able to put money towards those future goals, paying off debt, investing, that thing. And that's why it's super important to start doing that when you're young, because then when your income does increase, then you can even put more money aside and also really know, okay, now my income's increased. This is where that money's going to go. Instead of right when your income increases, your lifestyle automatically increases and you get nowhere with it. So
exactly. And on that note, I want to say that, lifestyle creep is a real thing. As your income increases, we increase our lifestyle. And I think that's okay to an extent. My husband and I make more money than we did whenever we were both teachers and when we were paying off that debt. And really spending that time learning how to budget and learning how to spend our money allowed us to know really what our values are. And so as our income has increased, yes, we were able to send more money to our goals, but we have increased our lifestyle some. We do look at, okay, what is it that really brings value to our life that we're willing to spend on now that we do make more money? And that's okay as well. It's not this all or nothing approach. You don't have to live a life of complete deprivation with a budget.
Yep. So how did you find that balance? Because I know for me in the beginning, like I said, like I was super frugal and it was super depriving for me. And every time I was like, I just got to invest more money so I can, have this future and have financial freedom and all this stuff. I got on that craze, But one of the things I forgot about was, I'm 20. Like this is the time where I should also be
so young.
These are, and it's great for investing purposes, but it's also like these are the times where I should be enjoying as well. So how did you find that balance between enjoying the present, but also, making some sacrifices and preparing yourself for a solid future?
I think that's a great question. I think that's a struggle that many people have because they think that once they make a decision, it has to be that decision forever. Once I say, okay, I have an extra $1,000 a month, right? Let's just easy numbers, an extra $1,000 a month. Do I invest $1,000? Do I invest $900 and enjoy $100? It's easy to think that people have to keep it the exact same for the rest of their life. But it's not. Money is very fluid. You can change. You can invest $1,000 one month and $900 the next month and $800 the third month and $1,000 the fourth month. I think that the balance comes from making sure that you are not depriving yourself so much that you said that you're not enjoying your life. So the question comes to, what is it that you enjoy? How much does that cost? Because once you know how much what you enjoy costs, you can make that decision. So for me, what I enjoyed whenever I was in, 24 years old. So how old are you now, Ethan?
I'm 20.
You're 20. Okay. So I got married, had a baby at 24 years old. So imagine 4 years from now, you're married with a baby. It's scary. My joy in that season of life literally looked like me being able to leave the house for an hour and walk in Target in peace and put my headphones in and listen to music, drink a latte, and buy one thing. That was my joy. And so I would budget, $20 or $30 a month for me to just do that. And I would buy one small thing, maybe once a week, or maybe I'd just walk around with my latte. It was almost just this escape. Once I was able to identify what that joy was, now I know how I can find balance with my budget. So that's no longer what I enjoy. That's not my life anymore. I don't do that anymore. But for me now, it's camping with my family and taking little trips, little mini vacations. And so how can I set aside money a couple $100s a month to make that happen. So there's a fluidity, I guess. And I don't know if that's a word, if I just made that up, and a balance. And it's okay if it changes over time. But I think definitely complete deprivation can lead to burnout. And that's when people usually give up.
Exactly. And it's very interesting because you talked about the things that you can enjoy and value don't necessarily have to be super expensive either.
No.
I was about to bring up camping as well. I love to go camping.
You do?
Exactly, yes. And spending $20 for a campsite for 2 nights and driving 45 minutes to go camping isn't that expensive of a trip, but it brings me so much value. And one person might think they need to take a huge trip, fly somewhere, do all these things, and it costs them a few grand, when in reality, instead, they could be going out every weekend doing something that doesn't cost as much, but brings them more value. So I think at this point, a lot of people probably see the benefit of budgeting. So let's get into the process. Can you explain kind of what the process of budgeting looks like for people?
Exactly. I mean, first off, you need to know how often you're paid. And so I tell people to budget per paycheck. So whether you're paid biweekly, weekly, I say budget per paycheck. So for our family, that's every 2 weeks, twice a month, essentially. We write a budget, and we list out our income. How much money do we have? And then literally all of our expenses. And that includes any bills that are coming out, anything like groceries, restaurants. It includes our savings. It includes investments. It includes, whenever we have babysitters, we have a babysitter come every Monday night. We have a housekeeper come every other week. So we literally list out everything. And your goal, right, is to have money left over. If you don't have money left over, and this has happened at times, we don't have money left over, we go back into our budget and we say, okay, what do we need to change? What do we need to cut down on? What are the things that don't matter the most to us that we can cut back on so that we can make sure we have enough money to cover all of these expenses and savings and investments? And that's exactly what we do. So you're going to have people, if you're first starting out, it might feel overwhelming because you might be sitting here thinking, I don't know what I spend money on. I have no idea. And what I recommend is going into your bank account, print your statement, and just look. Look at the patterns. How much money are you spending on restaurants? Where are you spending money elsewhere? Give yourself a spending allowance because you are an adult and you deserve one. And it's okay to spend money. Spending money isn't bad. And so as long as we're making sure that that number is not negative, then there's your budget. And of course, once you have it all laid out, you can look at it and say, you know what? I'm not sending as much money to savings as I want. So we look at our other expenses and we say, can I cut back $100 somewhere so I can send an extra $100 to savings? And so I do it. I'm a paper and pencil person. I do it all in paper and pencil. I erase, I mark, or I use whiteout because I'm a very visual person. It helps me to physically see it, and it almost like stays in my brain better that way.
Do you think that by doing it on pencil or paper and pencil, do you think by doing that it's easier to change areas of your budget? Because I think when you have it like in this big printed out paper or it's on an Excel sheet, like it's hard to not you just want to keep it the same.
Yes.
But I feel like paper and pencil, you'd be able to change it each month as you do your budget.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we write a new budget every 2 weeks, and sometimes we get off track with our budget. And for instance, my husband right now is at the discount tire, and I need 4 new tires in my car. So I'm like, okay, sitting here thinking, okay, we have money in savings for that, but that means that the next paycheck, we're going to need to be refilling that savings because I have it at I want it at this certain number. But the good thing about these things is when you have these emergency or unexpected expenses come up, for me, I literally go back to the budget and I will write a whole new budget in paper and pencil and say, okay, we have 10 days until payday. Here's how much money we have in our account. Let me refocus this. Let me rewrite this so that way I feel in control because, we did have a couple of extra unexpected expenses come up in the past few days, and now our budget feels thrown off. And so in the past, I used to just give up and say, oh, the budget's messed up. We'll start over next month. And then I would spend like crazy. Now I say, no, we're going to create a mini budget from today until the next day we're paid so that we can stay on track. track. And when and some people, apps work for them, Excel works for them, whatever works for you. I think it's about finding what works for you, something you can stick to consistently and see progress with. And for me, it's never been an app, ever.
Yeah.
I've tried them. I've been like, oh my gosh, Allison, you're so old. You're using paper and pencil. And I've tried apps and I'm like, nope, you know what? This grandma's just we're going to do what works. Why stop doing what works? And so for me, it's not about making everybody do it my way. It's about helping everybody find a way that works for them, that they can implement not just this month or this year, but forever.
Yeah, and one interesting thing that you've talked about that I've actually never heard before is people budgeting based on pay periods. I always hear like the monthly budget, but I've never heard someone budget every 2 weeks or based on when they get paid, which I think is actually probably the way you should do it. Just because that's when the money's coming in, so that's when you should, have the outlook for that. But
exactly.
I have a couple questions. So first, what do you do, with like you need 4 new tires. Like, how can you begin to prepare for those expenses? Because you don't know when they're going to come, but they are going to come. So how do you begin to prepare for those expenses?
Okay, so I love having sinking funds. So sinking funds is basically, you're saving for things that I break it down into 3 things. Number 1, something that might happen, like I need 4 new tires, right? That might happen. We know it might happen. Something that will happen, like I have to buy Christmas gifts for my kids. I know that's going to happen. Let me save in advance. And something that you want to happen, like I want to take a vacation and I want to be able to, go on vacation next summer and spend this much money. So we do have money in sinking funds. We set aside $50 a month in car maintenance. So obviously 4 new tires, I haven't heard back from my husband how much it's going to cost. I don't know how much tires run. I'm thinking like $800, $1,000? I have no idea. We don't have $1,000 in our car maintenance fund. We probably have like $150. That $150 will help take some of the edge off, but ultimately we have an emergency fund for this type of situation because it's not necessarily an emergency, but it needs to be handled. This is what we have money saved for, and we use that money will cover the rest of the cost of this. So essentially, he has a credit card. He'll put it on the credit card. When he gets home, we'll transfer the money from savings to checking and pay off the credit card immediately. And I think that it can be really easy to get off track with your budget when you do have these unexpected expenses. But having some sort of sinking funds set up allows you to absorb some of the cost or completely cover the cost.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have a car expense that's $200 and we have enough money in our sinking fund to cover it, and it's not a big deal. And it's just like, okay, great. That's what this is here for. And we started doing that whenever we were working to pay off debt. And actually, I became very frustrated because we did have unexpected car expense. And I thought, why are we even doing this budget? Life is just going to happen. Why even bother? And I think that that's a very common reaction. But instead of thinking like that, I thought, okay, well, I know it's going to happen. I don't know when, but I know it is. So what can I put in place so that way when this happens, I don't have the anxiety or the anger or the frustration that I just felt. And that's when we started our car maintenance sinking fund.
You can't make sure and know when each expense is going to come. Like,
right.
You can't plan that out. You're not like, okay, I'm going to need new tires at this point, or my engine's going to go out at this point. I'm going to need a new car. Like, you're not going to know exactly when those things happen. But like you said, you're able to kind of ease that process and make it to where instead of having $1,000 that was going to go towards debt, now it's coming out of a sinking fund or part of your emergency fund. And then over the next 2 or 3 months, you're working at putting that savings back into your emergency fund or back into that sinking car fund, just so you don't have to take it right out of your cash flow each time. Or even worse, putting it on a credit card and not being able to pay it off. So looking on the other end then, what would you say for people whose income is variable? Maybe they don't receive income every 2 weeks like someone. They own a business or their job's highly based on commission. How does someone like that begin to create a budget when they don't have that, I get paid X amount every single week or every other week?
Right. So I have a variable income. I do get paid. I do pay myself from my business the same time every month, but the amount differs. So for me, I actually have like a savings account that I can pull from. If for some reason I don't meet my lowest amount that I'm usually pay myself, I can supplement my income. So I think it's very
Gotcha.
important if you have a variable income to have a savings set aside. Maybe it's 1 month or 2 months of your basic expenses. I'm talking electricity, cell phones, minimum debt payments. I'm not talking about housekeepers and restaurants and all of the other
Yep.
things. So having money in a savings that if something doesn't go as planned, if you end up making $500 less than what you normally make and what your base number is, then you can pull $500 from that savings account to supplement your income. And then whenever you have more money come in that is more than your base, you can put that $500 back. So I think it's really important to just have this kind of like, I'm thinking of like a curse word. I don't want to curse out here, but this like, oh, snap fund, right?
Yeah.
And that you can use to cover yourself. And then also know what is your basic expenses? How much are they? That way, what is the very minimum I need to get by. That way, if anything extra comes, you can send it extra to debt. You can invest. You can save a little bit more for your vacation. But as long as you know your base number, that'll allow you to just make easier decisions with your money based on facts and not emotions, because it's stressful getting paid that way.
Yeah. And one of the things you're talking about, really, I guess the whole point of this episode when you're talking about budgeting is just relieving stress and giving yourself the freedom to spend, where you want to, but also relieving the stress so where when unexpected things come up, yes, they're unexpected and you can't, for sure know when they're going to happen, but you're able to pay them off and you're not in this stressful state every time something bad happens.
Exactly.
Because we know bad things are always going to happen. And if you're not prepared for that, then you're just going to be hit with it every single time it happens. And that could happen monthly. And that's just a lot of money stress that it's better that people, don't deal with.
Yes. And on that note, money stress seeps into all areas of our life. So it's going to affect your relationships. It's going to affect your job. It's going to affect all of these things. So when we can, I'm not saying that relieving your money stress is the magic pill, right? But relieving your money stress and having control over your money can positively impact other areas of your life as well.
For sure, because it's all connected,
Exactly.
I mean, there's so many stats that show that like the number one cause of divorce is from money problems. And
exactly.
Even with the job, you could have and choose a job that you love more if you're in a place financially to be able to do so.
Yes.
There's so many different things like that where it's all connected in a way that by fixing this one area, it's not going to make your life perfect, but it will improve other areas of your life as well. And that's one of the things I wanted to actually talk about next was just like how much money should people be putting towards this stuff, like their emergency fund, paying off debt, investing to be able to improve those other areas of their life.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it totally depends on each person's unique situation. Like I think back whenever I had 2 kids in daycare, we were sending $1,500 or $1,600 a month to daycare. So the amount we could send to these other things was very limited. Now my 2 kids are in elementary school. We don't have those daycare payments anymore. So now we have more freedom in where our money goes. So it definitely depends on your expenses. I would say with your emergency fund, it's important to have at least 3 months of very basic expenses, just what you need to kind of get by. Not Netflix, not Hulu. If you were to lose your job, what is it that you need to live with? And because you can cut out the other stuff and always bring it back, right? Just because you cancel Netflix this month doesn't mean you can't bring it back in 2 months if you lose your job and we're making tough decisions. So I would say 3 months in an emergency fund. And then with debt and investing, I think a lot of it sometimes deals with age. We paid off our debt when we were in our 20s. I think I was 28 whenever we became debt free. So that was rather young. We were still investing in pensions, through our work. So we had investments there. And we started investing in Roth IRAs after that. And I almost sometimes look back and say, oh my gosh, I wish I had done a little bit of both. But really, I was doing what I could at the time with what I knew. And I think that that's okay as well. So when it comes to paying off debt and investing, I think that you can do both at the same time. I think a lot of times it depends on how old we are and, really what our cash flow situation looks like, because it's going to be different for each person.
Exactly. Building that emergency fund first, you said 3 months.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we talked about earlier too is like, if you have a job that is a little bit more variable, you're a business owner, commission-based worker, that emergency fund can be a little bit more, or
exactly.
And one of the nice things I've actually talked to a guest previously about was when your expenses are lower, your emergency fund doesn't have to be as big, and that's one of the great things is just by knowing what your expenses are every month that you need, not the Netflix, not the extra eating out and that type of stuff.
Right.
When you know what your expenses are there, then you can begin to build that emergency fund. One of the things with the debt and investing, I'm assuming, you mentioned at the beginning, like when you had young kids, they were in daycare, you were both teachers, so you didn't have necessarily these high incomes.
Yep.
How did you learn to be able to grow that percentage that you're putting towards debt and investing, as you're making more money and as you're kind of going into the future?
I think how do we learn? We learn by just reading, by consuming content that would teach us. And that's the thing. I mean, I didn't learn about this in school. I didn't have someone sit me down and teach me. I had to, number one, make the choice that I wanted to learn, make the choice that was worth it, make the choice that choose that even though people tell you that this stuff is really, really confusing and you can't do it on your own, to say, you know what, I'm going to try and make that choice. And then number two, just spend time reading articles, reading books, listening to podcasts like this, consuming information that would help me understand it better. And so that's exactly what, my husband and I both did, to where we felt confident making money choices and we felt confident with where we were going with our money.
For sure. So before I ask you the last question,
Okay.
Where can the listeners of this episode, find you?
Of course. So if you're listening to this episode, I have my own podcast as well. It's called the Inspired Budget Podcast. You can listen there. You can also find me on Instagram at Inspired Budget, or you can check me out online, inspiredbudget.com.
Okay, perfect. So the last question is, why is wealth building important to you specifically?
For me, it comes down to choices. It comes down to being able to make choices that, I think a lot of people think, oh, I do want to work until 65, or when I'm in my 60s, this is what I'm going to want to do. And to me, I'm open to the idea that might not know that right now. I might not know what I want because I'm 34. So how do I know what I want in 30 years? But whenever I am able to build wealth and I have money set aside for that time in my life, I have choices, and I'm not stuck with a choice I made 30 years prior because I didn't know who I would be at that moment in time. And it also allows me, so it's choices. And then for me, it's my kids. It's knowing that my kids won't have to worry about their mom and dad whenever we're older because they aren't going to have to help support us. That's big for me as well.
Gotcha. So yeah, it comes back to really what we talked about throughout the whole episode is bringing yourself freedom and relieving that stress and having choices in the future. So
exactly.
For everyone listening, trust me, go and follow her on Instagram, listen to her podcast. She has some great episodes and is putting out some amazing content that I engage with a lot and really, really love as well. So make sure you go and follow her. Allison, thank you so much for coming on today's episode.
Thanks, Ethan. It was so great.
All right. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you all so much for watching today's episode. Before you go, I would really appreciate it if you liked this video. Also, subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications so you get updated every week when I post a new episode. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.